Today we're going to be talking on the subject of the discipline of children. And I don't think I've preached on this since I've been here, so I got a lot stored up, so this could be a while, yeah. But we're going to look at some scriptures in the book of Proverbs. There are many of them that speak to this particular subject. And we're going to start in Proverbs 29, verses 15 and 17, where it says that a rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire. I read about this one single mother who was feeling overwhelmed one summer. Her teenage son wasn't doing the things that she had been asking him to do. He'd just been lazy. And one of the things that she had wanted him to do during the summer was to train their new puppy. And he just wasn't doing that and a lot of other things. And she happened to go to the library one day and she checked out a book about how to train your puppy. And as an afterthought, she grabbed another book, one that happened to be about teenagers. It was called Teenagers, The Continuing Challenge. She didn't think much about it, but when she went up to the table, to check out the books, the librarian looked at the two books that she picked, one about training puppies, one about teenagers, and the librarian said to this lady, "The puppy is going to be easier." And if you have ever raised a teenager, you know how very true that is. Well, I want to make a statement, and in your mind, you can determine whether or not you agree or not. You don't have to say it out loud. America has gone soft. And specifically, America has gone soft when it comes to the parental discipline of their children. And I'm no sociologist by any means, but it seems to me that many of the problems that we're encountering in our culture today, much of the violence, much of the immorality and the corruption, goes back to the lack of discipline in the homes. We can talk about government programs all we want. We can talk about government assistance. We can talk about all kinds of problems where we can want the government involved, but the reality is that it stems from the home. It starts in the home life, and undisciplined children create much havoc in society, and I believe that's what we're seeing much of today. Now, the Holy Scriptures clearly, and if this was in writing, I would have it in all caps, bold, and underlined, clearly, the Bible teaches that parents are to discipline their children. I don't think there's any way you can read the Bible and come to any other conclusion. The scriptures that we read in Proverbs 29 just a moment ago talk about the importance and the need for the discipline of our kids. In fact, God Himself disciplines His children. Did you know that? In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 5 through 11, it talks about how God chastises or disciplines those who are His. And He does it for the purpose of correction. He does it to teach us right from wrong, teach us to learn from our mistakes. So even God Himself is a discipline in His children. Now, the lack of discipline in homes results in children who grow up often to be rebellious. Often they have no respect for people in authority. And tragically, most of all, many children who grow up without discipline are unwilling to follow God. And that is the ultimate in the lack of discipline, the unwillingness to follow the Lord. Now, when I talk about discipline, what am I talking about? There are many methods of discipline, right? In correcting children and teaching them right from wrong. For example, there is spanking, there are timeouts, there is the withholding of privileges, taking away privileges. There are extra chores or responsibilities you can give a child to teach them lessons. And the methods that you use are almost as unlimited as your creative mind. So there are many, many methods that you can use to discipline children. What is important is the effectiveness of the method that you choose. What you're looking for are methods that produce results. Because think about it, all kids are different. And children are going to respond differently to various types of discipline. I mean, some kids, if you give them a timeout, might like it. Go to your room. They might like being alone. You know, some kids might thrive on that. Or spanking, you know. I mean, there are some kids, you spank them and it's like, give me more, I don't care. You know, and maybe spanking and want to work on them, whatever. But you got to zero in on what works with that particular child, because it's not so much the method, but it's what's going to produce results. Now, for the record, and I feel like I need to talk about this because in the last 20 years or so, there has been much written and spoken of concerning spanking, right? And many in the world today are saying, don't spank your kids because you're going to destroy them, you're going to ruin your relationship, you're going to warp them, and all these different kinds of things. Personally, I have no problem with spanking. The Bible says if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. I don't have an issue at all. If I was to raise kids again, if we somehow miraculously had an IU child, God forbid. Just think, he'd be graduating when I'm 72 years old. Wow. But God bless those who do have children in later age. I admire them for their endurance. But if that was to happen, I would still use that same method. You know, if it works, it works. And again, there's a lot written today about it. Tell you what Billy Graham said about it. He said, you know, psychologists today say that if you spank your child, you're going to warp their personality. And he said, if I misbehaved, I got warped all right. But it wasn't my personality. He said it was a little lower on my posterior. And Grady Wilson, who worked alongside Billy Graham for many years, evangelist, he was one of 5 sons. And they said his mother kept a razor strap hanging on the wall that said, I need thee every hour. If you had 5 boys, you'd probably need that too. So I mean, I don't see an issue with it. I think it's a biblical concept. You know, sometimes a whack on the hand or on the rear end is what a child needs, you know. And if you're against it, that's all right. That's that's your own mindset. I'm not going to try to talk you into it, but I don't have any problem with it. I think it's a biblical concept. Now, having said that, obviously, and I also shouldn't even need to say this, but in today's world I should say it, I certainly am not talking about abusing your children. I mean, that obviously is not biblical, right, or loving in any capacity at all. In fact, in Ephesians 6:4, it says that a father ought not provoke his child to wrath. And you can interpret that different ways. I think what Paul's trying to say is don't do things to your kids just to get under their skin. Our punishment and discipline of them needs to be redemptive. It needs to have a therapeutic or corrective measure, not just because you're mad at them and want to get even with them. And so I think that's what Paul's saying when he says don't provoke your children to wrath. Don't do things just because they annoyed you. You're going to annoy them or make their life tough just because you're mad at them. You should have a redemptive or therapeutic or corrective measure in your discipline. Now, having said that, let me say this. This sermon today is not just about spanking. Okay? I don't want you to just take that from this sermon. This sermon is about discipline in general. It may include spanking. But what is important is that we're living in a culture today where many parents don't even discipline their kids at all. I mean, they don't spank them, they don't take things away from them, they don't do anything to correct them, to teach them. They let them get away with everything, and therefore they have no direction and no wisdom being imparted to them by their parents. They're almost like a hands-off approach. They just let their kids do everything, whatever they want. And we're raising kids that are rebellious, have no respect for authority, they're boundless in what they do, and we need a return. We need a return to discipline in the home. Now, with that said, I want to mention 3 things that I think is important that's taught in the book of Proverbs about discipline. It's purpose and why we do it. It's not just because we're upset with our kids. It's not just because we're mad at them. It's not just because we want to get even with them. But there are some good reasons for discipline. So number one, discipline is an indication that you love your child. Now, if you're a young person here today, you might be thinking, really? That shows me they love me? Really? Now, you may not realize it now, but give it 5 years or 10 years and you'll finally come to realize it. Discipline is an indication that your parents love you. Look at these verses in Proverbs. Proverbs 13:24. Whoever spares the rod, look at this, hates their children. But the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. Proverbs 3:12. Because the Lord disciplines those he loves, just as a father disciplines the son that he delights in. We discipline because we love our kids. So let me explain this. First of all, James Dobson, in his book Dare to Discipline, said that love and discipline are not antithetical. In other words, they're not mutually exclusive. It's not like you have discipline over here, and so if discipline's over here, love must be over here. No, love and discipline go together. And so he says in his book, he says when a parent is disciplining his or her child, what he needs to keep in mind is, I'm doing this for my child. Discipline is not something you do to your child. Discipline is something you do for your child. And there's a world of difference. Because if you're doing discipline to your child, it's almost like you're just doing it to get even or because you're upset. But discipline is something you do for your child because you're trying to correct them and teach them right from wrong. Also, James Dobson said that when we discipline, basically what we're saying is, I love you too much to let you continue to behave this way. You see, I love you too much not to set boundaries. Let me give you some examples. Let's go to the old proverbial running through the house with scissors in your hand. You know, everybody loves using that example. And their kid keeps doing it. You got to discipline. You got to do something to teach them, you know. Well, why is that? Because you love your kid. You don't want your kid to fall and stab himself. You love your child. And so you teach them not to do it because you love them. Same reason you teach your kid not to smart mouth you. Because you love your child, you don't want to grow up with a kid that's going to smart mouth his elders. Or if they're lying or stealing, why do you correct them? Why do you discipline? Why do you punish them? Because you love them. And you don't want to raise a liar and a thief. So you see, your motivation behind your correction isn't just because you're mad or upset or want to get even or I want to teach that kid a lesson. It's because you love your child. And you want them to grow up to be upstanding, godly, respectable individuals. You do it out of love. And that's the key. A couple of years ago, I shared a little formula with you that I came across in a book by Josh McDowell. That I read this when I was a young father, and I've always kept this in mind. Because we can't just be disciplinarians, okay? We can't just be one who just puts the hammer down and doesn't show continual love for our kids. And Josh McDowell has this formula, and I want to give you the first part of it first. And you know, if you were here a couple years ago when I shared this, it might look familiar, but I want to keep reinforcing this. Okay, the first part says that rules minus a relationship equals rebellion. Now, what this is saying is, if all you have with your kids is a bunch of rules, don't do this, make sure you get this done by this date, don't do that, don't go there, don't hang out with that person, and all it is rules, be in bed by a certain time, and all these kinds of things, and you have no real connection, no relationship with your kid. You don't really interact with them, you don't take them places, you don't spend time with them, you don't ask them about their lives, you don't enter their world, and all you are is just a rule maker. You have rules but no relationship. Most often, a kid like that's going to grow up in rebellion. That's going to be their response to you. My dad doesn't care about me. My mom really doesn't care that much. All they want me to just make sure I do the right things all the time. Make sure I behave. But they don't really ask me about my life. They don't connect with me. And so the second part of this formula is this. Rules plus a relationship equals a response. I mean, it's a world of difference. You can have the same rules as the first person in the first formula. The rules minus what? You can have the same rules. But if you have a relationship with your kid, you take them to the park, you play with them, you maybe enter their world, play some of the games that they like to play, ask them questions about their lives, really invest in them, talk to them, listen to them, goof off with them, be silly with them, tell them your corny dad jokes, whatever it takes. Just let them know you love them. Now, for me and Cindy, we would play Super Mario Kart. I was terrible, and I remain terrible to this day. So I knew whenever I played Mario Kart, I was going to end up in last place. I'd just swallow my pride. But that's something that Jordan, especially, he's like a pro at it, would love. And it's just like sometimes just let them know they're important, love them, enter their world, and then you develop that relationship. You see. And then when you come down with the rules, look, I want you to do this, you need to do this, I want this done by a certain time. They say, my dad loves me, my mom loves me, they care about me, they do things with me, they take me places, they goof off with me, they care about me. And they're much more likely to respond to your rules. I love that formula. And keep that in mind always. You've got to have the relationship. That's what gives the rules some kind of power. All right, the second thought. First of all, discipline will show your kids that you love them. They may not believe that when they're young, but when they're older, they'll understand. Secondly, the discipline is a means of imparting wisdom to your children. Discipline is how you teach them. It's how you impart wisdom. Look at these verses here. These are the ones we started out with. A rod and reprimand impart wisdom. They impart wisdom. But a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. Discipline your children, and they will give you peace. They will bring you the delights you desire. It gives them wisdom. How else are they going to learn? How else are kids going to learn if mom and dad don't guide them and instruct them along the way? That's how we teach them, by giving them that guidance and that wisdom. In my preparation for this sermon, I came across a quote by Beethoven, and I got to be honest, when I read it, I didn't know if it was really true with all the fake stuff in the internet, but I did some research, and I think he really said this. There was an Italian composer named Rossini, and evidently Beethoven didn't think a whole lot of him. He said Rossini would have been a great composer if his teacher had spanked him enough on the backside. Can you believe that Beethoven said that? Yes. Yep, Jordan can, because he knows a lot about Beethoven. That's one of the things he studied in school. So, yep. But discipline imparts wisdom, even in a musician, even in a composer, right? But I want to talk to you for a few minutes about one of the most important things about discipline, okay? That's so important, and a lot of parents mess this up, and I'm sure I messed it up a time or two myself. When you discipline your kids, you've got to follow through on what you say. Okay? A lot of parents will make a threat or a threat of punishment or discipline, but then when the rubber meets the road, they'll back down and say, oh, don't worry about it. You've got to follow through. Heard about two kids at school were talking. One of them said, I got grounded. The other one said, how long? The first kid said, well, my mom said for a week. It'll probably just be 2 days. Now listen. Children are diligent students of parental behavior. Okay? I want to say that again. Children are diligent students of parental behavior. They watch you. They watch how you respond. They watch the decisions you make. And they learn from it. And if they learn that mom or dad says, I'm going to be grounded a week, but they always give in after a couple of days, then when you say you're grounded for a week, they're going to be walking to the room saying, well, it ain't going to be a week, I know that. They'll wimp out and they'll let me off the hook in a couple of days. Kids learn that. You have to follow through. It's very important. If you make some type of statement, you've got to stick with it. It's very, very important. So if you say to your kid, if you do that one more time, you can't go to the birthday party tomorrow, stick to it. Stick to it. If they do it again, and you let them go to the birthday party, what have they learned? I don't have to listen to mom or dad. I mean, they say that, but they don't mean it. And they're going to go through life believing that any threat anybody makes, they don't really mean it. And mom and dad have to stick to it. It's very, very important. Now, here's the thing, though, you got to remember. Sometimes it's not easy. Let's say you tell your kid, if you do that one more time, you can't go to the birthday party. Your kid may say, "What do you mean I can't go to the birthday party? I've been waiting for weeks to go to this party. I hate you. You're the worst parent in all the world." You know what you do with that? Forget it. They'll love you in a week. Don't worry about it. I say about every parent's been told by his kids that they're hated. Don't respond. Oh, I don't think we ever responded. Whatever. Just let it go. I mean, I don't know. If you feel the need to respond to it, that's fine. But don't be crushed by it. Don't let it crush your spirit. They're just trying to work you. They're just trying to break you down. Stick to your guns. You got to stick to your guns. And so if you make a threat, follow through. Now there's one little caveat I want to throw in here, because I don't want to ruin somebody's life. At least not today. It's Father's Day. Once in a while, and I know I did this and I had to kind of eat crow. Once in a while, you might, in your anger and frustration, make a threat that's really ridiculous. You ever do that? Like if you do that one more time, I'm not going to let you go on vacation with us and you have to stay with Grandma. And then the next day you're thinking, "Oh, why did I say that? That was stupid." And it's not practical, it's not right, and it was very, very out of line. Sometimes, with parents, we're not perfect. And so once in a while, we may have to go to our kid and say, "That was not smart of me. I wasn't thinking, I was responding, reacting." And sometimes, you just need to kind of humble yourself and say that, that's a bad decision. But you still need to have an alternative punishment, even if you do change it. But let me make this clear. That should be the exception rather than the pattern. If you're doing that all the time, your kid's going to pick up on it. But I'm just saying that because once in a while, if you're like me, you say something that was totally stupid. I've done it. Yeah, I've done it. Thanks for not saying amen, Jordan. Now. So along these lines, let me give you this quote up here. Yes, this is a good one. "Give to a pig when it grunts, and to a child when it cries, and you will have a fine pig, but a bad child." Isn't that good? That's good. So don't just give your kid everything they want. All right, number 3. Discipline is a means of leading a child to the truth. Look at these verses in Proverbs. "Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you punish them with the rod, they will not die." I like that. They will not die. "Punish them with the rod and save them from death." And I don't necessarily think he's thinking about physical death here. I think he's talking about spiritual death. Because what we're doing when we discipline our kids, we're leading them toward eternal truth. It's not just dealing with the matter of the moment. It's not just trying to teach them selfishness versus sharing, but it can lead them toward eternal truth. That's what the ultimate goal is. And one of the most important things in parenting is understanding that we go through short-term pain so they can experience long-term gain. Because I want to tell you what I think one of the main reasons is why a lot of parents don't discipline their kids. Because it's easier not to. But they're sacrificing. They're taking what's easy now, but it's going to turn into a mountain later. They're saying, "Well, I'm going to take the easy way now." But boy, you just wait. When they're 17, man, it's going to be tough. Because you took the easy way now. Let me give you an example. Say a kid's screaming in the store. They want a toy or they want some candy. They're little, They're just throwing a fit and they're kicking the cart and they're screaming. We've all been there, right? I'm doing that all the time, so you say, "Recall, William." But we've all been there, right? With a kid that's screaming they want something. And how many times, how many times do parents say, "Oh, okay, you can just have the candy"? Why do they do that? Because it's easier. The kid shuts up, they're content, and they go on their way. You keep doing that. I pity you when your kids are 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. If you just continually give to them what they want. Go back to that quote. "Give to a pig when he grunts, give to a kid when he cries. You have a fine pig, but a bad child." And you see, I think a lot of times parents don't discipline because it's just easier not to. I can remember times when our kids were growing up and Cindy and I would be doing something, maybe we're watching a movie on TV or something, the kids come in the room, and they got a little disagreement or something. It'd be easier just to say, you go settle it yourself. We don't want to deal with it. And go back and watching our movie or whatever we were doing. That'd be easy. But you know what? You just got to stop what you're doing and you got to deal with it. Is it harder? Yes. Is it a headache? Yes. Raising 3 boys, I told her the other day, I felt like sometimes I should just wear a referee shirt. Because sometimes that's what I felt like I was doing when you were trying to referee between the kids, And it's difficult. It's a lot of work, Mom and Dad, to discipline your children. It's a lot of work. It's hard. It takes a lot of patience. Like when you say, if you don't eat your vegetables, you can't watch TV or play video games, whatever. And it's hard to sit there with them at the kitchen table when they're being stubborn as a mule and they keep whining and crying, and it's hard. As I sit here and talk about this, I'm kind of glad our kids are grown now. But stay the course, Mom and Dad. Stay the course, and you'll be blessed for it. You'll be blessed for it. Now, one last thing, and it's kind of circling back to what I was talking about earlier. You can't just be a disciplinarian. Like I said earlier, we need a return to discipline. We need that. We desperately need that in America. But you got to love your kids too. You got to interact with your kids. You got to develop a relationship with your kids. So do both. Do both. There was a book I read when I was younger too, and I don't even know what the author's name was, but it was called A Man of Steel and Velvet. And it talked about how men need to be men of steel, where they're strong and have a backbone and they stand for something. And they're strong with their kids. But it was also a man of velvet, meaning they have a heart. And they're kind and they're compassionate. And they relate to their wife and their kids. It's both. So don't just be a mean, strong disciplinarian. But have a heart too. Love your kids. Have fun with them. Goof off. Be silly. And just enjoy them. And let them know they're important to you and love them. And they'll be much more likely to respond. Let's stand together as we pray. Lord Jesus, we thank you so much for our young people. And they're so